I'm from the science division in the RIPE NCC, which is another non-profit which makes a profit. So these are a few of the things that we spend that profit on for the benefit of our membership, i.e. most of you guys, and the wider internet community. Is that all right? Do
you want it full screen? The slides full screen or not?
Yeah, sure. It says exit full screen.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, there you go. Okay. Yeah, so I also want to put a focus on how this can be used by network operators. So this is RIPE Atlas. I guess a lot of you know what it is. Some of you probably don't. So it's a global measurement system where people volunteer to host individual probes, vantage points, and they can then be used as part of the built-in measurements which the NCC organizes, and also by individual users who are probe hosts and just people from the RIPE membership. They can schedule their own measurements to whatever they want. So what I'd like to sort of go into a little bit of detail is how you can use this tool to integrate into your monitoring stack and get something useful out of it so you can get alerts and sort of use it on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, so it's relatively easy to set up. Once you're either a host or if you're a member, you can request to sign up. Then you can just go along, you can create a measurement, choose your target, choose where the probes are coming from. You set up this new feature called status checks, which I'll go into, and then you can integrate it into Icinga or Nagios or whatever you use. So in general, to schedule a measurement, you log into atlas.ripe.net, which is where you need to go to start with all of this stuff. You can create a measurement of, you can choose the period, you can adjust all the different parameters that you want to. The documentation's all there. And sort of, as an aside, there's a credit system in place to sort of make sure that the system is fairly used, to make sure we don't have sort of big spikes, it's not overloaded. You get credits by hosting probes, and also as a RIPE member, you can request 1 million credits to start with, just to sort of get you going and see how you can actually use the tool. You can also get credits by sponsoring RIPE Atlas or hosting an Atlas anchor, and I'll touch on those things in a bit. So the status checks, once you have your measurement created, so say you've just created a ping measurement to one of your servers, you can go to a REST API URL, and that URL will basically give you a look back at the recent history for this measurement, and it will have a few indicators in there to see how well it's been performing recently. And you can configure those, you can configure thresholds and look back and stuff like that to see, okay, so my median RTT has gone way up and I just want it to tell me. So it's a poll mechanism. You're requesting this URL in your scripts. So we already have a few examples, community contributed examples of how to integrate this into Icinga and Nagios. You could probably roll your own very easily. You basically use the check HTTP plugin. You can see a couple of URLs there, and a post on the Icinga blog as well about how to use it. So as well as monitoring a service, as well as monitoring using ping and traceroute, we also allow you to monitor DNS. Now, Atlas itself comes with the ability to perform DNS measurements. So you choose your DNS query, you choose your target server, and anybody can set up a measurement like that. What we also have now is there's historically been a service called DNSMON, hosted and developed by the RIPE NCC. It used the old TTEM boxes, which have now been decommissioned or deprecated, or are being. And we're using RIPE Atlas to provide this service now. So DNSMON is a kind of augmented DNS monitoring service. It's for it's primarily targeted at the root name servers and CCTLDs and a couple of GTLDs and other sort of important infrastructural TLDs. Right now, we don't offer the DNSMON visualization to other people. So, I mean, this will be interesting to a few people in the room, Brett, for instance. But what we are considering, especially based on feedback from you guys and the rest of the community, is allowing at least some of the DNSMON visualizations to be used by individual operators of zones. So if there's interest for that, then we'll kind of move some of the DNSMON visualizations and functionality into RIPE Atlas. You can, I don't think I've got the URL here, but you can have a look at DNSMON. It's just atlas.ripe.net/DNSMON. You can see there's an article there on the blog as well. Okay, so kind of a quick update about what else is new on RIPE Atlas. So right now we're sitting at about 5,200 active probes around the world. So you can see the distribution there as well. It's kind of heavily, as you would imagine, it's heavily biased towards Europe, the United States, but we're kind of broadening out. 7,000 active users, which I think is, I think that's users in the last year. So I mean, it's a bit less in the last, say, 90 days, a month. And 52 Atlas anchors, which I can talk about in a bit. Yeah, and we currently allow ping, traceroute, DNS, and SSL measurements. For certain purposes, we have support for HTTP measurements, but we don't enable it out of the box because of concerns. I mean, these probes are hosted everywhere in the world, so if from anywhere in the world you can have random HTTP requests going to a server of somebody's choice, that could cause problems for various people. It might discourage people to be probe hosts. So we have, this is the hardware we have. The ones on the left there is the V1, which was the retro back when years started 2000 instead of 20. That was replaced by basically a TP-Link mini Wi-Fi router, which has been completely custom firmware, and yeah, the Wi-Fi isn't enabled on it. And we also have the RIPE Atlas anchors, which are kind of beefy boxes which sit in your rack, and they're well-known targets, so they're targets for Atlas measurements or potentially other measurements, and they're also very beefy probes, which means that they can measure a lot more than the standard probe because we have a limit on how much a standard probe can do, not least because of bandwidth and stuff like that. Atlas doesn't measure bandwidth actively, or should I say, it doesn't do passive measurements. It only does active measurements, and it doesn't measure bandwidth. Yeah, so there's also measurements between the anchors, so there's a full mesh. So we have a kind of a very reliable baseline view of various parts of the internet. These are sitting in data centers all over the world. And we also have sort of random probes measuring each anchor. So yeah, the idea is that we have a baseline. We have a baseline regionally, and over time we can see how things change. And we're hoping to get, obviously, more anchors in more interesting locations as well, because we have a similar bias where the anchors are in our service area and a few in the States and so on. So these are just a few success stories of using RIPE Atlas in general to verify something operationally or find a problem. There was the instance of installing an LRoot instance in the Belgrade, and yeah, so you can kind of see there that's what we call a built-in measurement. Basically, every probe by default has these built-in measurements to certain targets, and one of the sets of targets is the root servers, the root zone servers. Yeah, and you can look at all kind of information about the instances for Anycast servers, and one of the more interesting parts of this is whenever there's an outage, we can kind of provide IP level analysis of what happened when, and what effects there were on all the various probes around the world, including there in Sudan. So new features probably since the last UKNOF, or recently anyway. So there's what we call the seismograph. So this is a stacked chart with multiple ping measurements. So you can see from various different probes how stuff changed at a given point in time. So that's, it's an interesting way of visualizing kind of lots of individual vantage points at the same time. It's also an interactive control panel, so you can remove and add and so on. There's a zoomable ping graph on the Atlas page, so once you have a probe, once you have measurements, you can see the pings and you can zoom through history and go through. We used to have kind of a page full of RRDs, and now it's all fancy and JavaScript-y. So plans for the future. We plan to enable people to tag probes, initially as, say, my favorites, starred probes, something like that. Maybe expanding it as well to other interesting tags and ways that you can find probes or measurements which interest you. IPv6 support is there and it all works. We have one issue, which is right now if a probe tells us that it has an IPv6, a globally routed IPv6 address, we kind of just take its word for it and we put it into IPv6 measurements. And as you can expect, a lot of the time that doesn't actually work because it has this address and it doesn't work. So we're looking to be more smart about that. Broadening the base of the install base of the probes through RAR cooperation, cooperating with the other regions in the world and by other ways. And we have the roadmap for RIPE Atlas and our other services. It's roadmap.ripe.net. So people can look at that, see the kind of full outlook, and give us feedback, requests, whatever it is. So we try and make RIPE Atlas and our other services kind of community-driven as much as possible. I showed you before with the Icinga Nagios checks, there's this RIPE Atlas community GitHub. It has contributed code. It also has contributed research data analysis tools. The source code for the actual measurements, the 4 or 5 measurements which I talked about, is available as well. So that's the code which is actually running on each individual probe. We have this concept of ambassadors. We have ambassadors here. So these are people who give the probes. Anybody can become an ambassador. Basically, you put in a request, the email address is there, and we'll give you some probes, and you'll go out and give those to someone else. And yeah, that's how it works. We also have the concept of sponsorship, which is that you can pay some money and then either give out the probes to people, whoever you want, so it could be your customers, it could be anyone, or you can sponsor probes that we just then give out on your behalf. So these are our sponsors for last year, I guess still this year. RIPEstat. RIPEstat is another one of our tools, which the idea behind RIPEstat is you can get information about any internet resource, which primarily is an IP-based resource or an autonomous system number, but we also have support for host names, limited support for host names, countries, keywords like net names and AS names. So basically being able to type in something about some network and getting back all the information that we have about it. So this includes registration data, our own registration data from other RARs where possible, and also routing information. So the NCC has a routing information service which we provide information about what is routed at any one time by who. And we also have integration of RIPE Atlas within RIPEstat, as well as other things like MLab, network activity, so that's kind of relatively new. RIPEstat itself is split into different parts. So there's the RIPEstat website, which is the general way you can use it. There's also a widget API, which means anything you can see on the RIPEstat website, you can take that and put it into your own monitoring pages, your own website, whatever you want. So it could be part of your own kind of day-to-day process. There's a data API, same thing, but with a RESTful JSON API, which can be integrated into scripts or used for research. There is a text service, which is basically a whois-like service if you prefer using the command line. And it says mobile app there, but there's an iPhone app, iOS app, right now. Not an Android app, so if people feel strongly about that, then we'd like to hear it. Yeah, there's a whole load of things there. I mean, the best thing is to go along and see what there is, but there's BG Play, which allows you to see at any point in time what kind of changes there were within our Quagga state, basically, for a particular router. There's an abuse finder, which is actually one of the most widely used things on RIPEstat, because it's if you search RIPE region abuse, you probably will end up at RIPEstat, and that just tells you who you should contact, how sure we are that you should contact them. Yeah, and it allows people to find the right person, hopefully. Yeah, and you can kind of customize things as you want. You can arrange your own views so that you can set up the panel as you like it. So new features in RIPEstat. It's possible to compare multiple widgets on the same page arbitrarily. If you go to the RIPEstat website, there's a section that says use cases, and one of those is comparing different widgets, so you can assemble your own kind of screen that way. It's possible for various widgets to compare different resources to see how, in some cases, say, how Germany compares with the Netherlands for IPv6 adoption or something like that. There's a country routing widget. It's possible to visualize bandwidth capacity. Like I said, we now use MLab data, which provides network activity and bandwidth capacity. So the network activity is based on the people who have run these bandwidth capacity tests to MLab. The RIS service, the routing information service, had various front ends. We've moved most of those now into RIPEstat. There's a few other tools out there like RIS, but this is now the focal point for that information. And there's an ongoing integration with RIPE Atlas. Yeah, trying to make sure that we're using RIPEstat front-end technologies on Atlas and using RIPE Atlas more and more as a back-end in RIPEstat. It's also used RIPEstat as a tool by the RIPE NCC for assisted registry checks. So we're kind of eating our own dog food with it and trying to make sure that we can use that to see whether a particular resource is in use and that what actually is in the BGP state matches what's in the registry and so on. So there's various ways to contact us. They're there. Facebook isn't there, but you can do that as well if you like. And any questions?
Hello. Has there been any sort of major work to compare IPv4 versus IPv6 service quality with all the Atlas probes?
So right now, when you have a probe, you see these built-in measurements, and these built-in measurements will target a whole set of servers. The interesting ones are that it does the root servers. So you'll see for each one basically pings to v4 and v6 versions of each root server. And you can do the same thing with trace routes and whatever else. Within the DNSMON tool as well for the root server operators, it's possible to switch between IPv4 and v6 and see them together.
There's no kind of ongoing things done coordinated by RIPE to produce a kind of regular statistics on how we're doing with IPv6 versus IPv4. And
do you mean like a sort of a global for the whole network seeing, you know.
So if there's like a nice a graph that says, okay, this region is really good with IPv4, but not so good with IPv6, or the latency on v6, or we have longer paths and these sorts of things on IPv6. It's kind of really useful sort of comparison data to say, well, is the user's experience as good yet on IPv6 in this particular area?
I know that there has been stuff like that done by us and by other people, I think. One good place to go to is what's called RIPE Labs, which is basically the RIPE blog. And quite a lot of these kind of research topics pop up on there. And we have stuff written by our people and by other people in the community. So that's sort of quite a good contact point.
Martin.
Martin Levy. So the credits. I've just gone through this and grabbed a bunch of credits and restart some UDMs against a new network. But 1 million credits. Can you put that in to the appropriate scale? Do we know how many sort of overall credits there are for the active users on the RIPE Atlas probes today? How many measurements are being done? How many credits are being created a day versus being spent a day? Where does your system sit in the credit deficit sense of the word?
Okay, I don't have the figures in my head, but on the RIPE Atlas website, we have sort of global statistics on credits. We also have somewhere a top spenders list, I think. But also, I can send you a sort of report or something like that, or send you a link to the place to go.
Probecoin as a currency.
Yeah.
Can I just
Atlas.
remind our people asking questions to identify themselves and their affiliation before asking questions? I've got a question. We have a serious problem on the internet with source. Sorry,
Who are you?
I already did that. Okay, I suppose I should say which. I'm asking this in the affiliation of the DNSORG organization that I spend most of my time working on. We have a serious problem on the internet with spoofed source addresses. What about using RIPE Atlas probes to measure the extent of that problem? Because there's very little data on it.
Yeah. What about it? Well, go ahead. I mean, yeah, so I guess it should be possible. And yeah, it would be an interesting thing to talk about, maybe even raise it in a working group with RIPE.
Okay, any other questions for Chris? Paul Mansfield at the front here. Dave, Paul's.
Sorry. Paul Mansfield, Grapeshot. How long do you intend to keep all the data that you acquire through RIPE Atlas? Are you going to try and keep it indefinitely, or do you throw away stuff that's more than the number of months old?
Yeah, I think the current idea is to keep it eternally. I mean, that's what we've done so far. We haven't thrown away any data yet.
Victor Hahn, Flex Optics. As you know, virtualization is like totally hip at the moment, so we are also virtualizing almost everything. Have you ever considered providing a software version of the Atlas probe?
Yes, we've considered it. I think right now we're focusing on the probes because then, I mean, everything is alike. We don't have to work as technical support to people to install things. And also although we have a lot of home users, it's also nice to be able to, plug it into a data center. We have quite a few people with probes in data centers. So yeah, it's not something which is completely precluded as far as I know, but I don't think we have any plans to do it.
Thanks.
Okay, looks like we're done with questions. So thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you.